guess this is really a thought piece. So hopefully I can share with my perspective and get your feedback on this. So hopefully I'm testing the idea with you guys. So hopefully that makes sense. So really what I'd like to talk about. So I've been basically teaching the leadership paper on the MBA and the Masters of Business, and it strikes me when you go through all these different models that actually, are they really different models, or are they just saying the same thing with different language or from different perspectives? So what I really wanted to talk through tonight really was, so what are these different models? What's the essence of them, and then how could they link? What would an integrated model potentially look like? And then hopefully a bit of discussion around that. And then well, if that's true, what are the implications of that? So that's sort of my agenda. So again, hopefully it's a free and open discussion rather than me doing all the talking as we go through as well. So I guess if we think about where we've come from in terms of leadership, so I don't know how to say the name, but Lao Tao, is it? TZU, I think Tao, I think how to say it in Chinese. One of the early sort of views of potentially servant leadership. So he said a leader is best known when people barely know he exists, and we'll stick around the he. Not so good when people obey and acclaim him, worse when they despise him. But of a good leader who talks little, when the work is done, his aim fulfilled, they will say, we did it ourselves. So the real humility, servant leadership approach in the 5th century BC. And then we had Socrates, really was knowledge-based leadership. Actually, people follow you because you're credible, because you have knowledge. And in fact, he argued against democracy because he said, well, actually, people have imperfect knowledge, so why should they be able to vote if they don't actually know everything that the intelligentsia know? But even Xenophon, who actually wrote about leaders at the time, he was saying, well, some actually get willing obedience versus grudging compliance. So actually, okay, knowledge might have been it, but actually wasn't just what it was about. And then we had the sort of 30 AD, you had this Christian model leadership, which is back to servant leadership. Actually, Jesus washing the disciples' feet. Actually, the leader could serve the followers rather than actually it being a hierarchical relationship. And all the queens of England actually washed bishops' feet from, I think, 1100 through to 1600 as replicating that. So actually, you're the king or queen, but actually, are you there to serve your subjects? And since that time, I think they've given us a silver coin rather than a washed feet. And I see on the news the other night, they've restarted that after COVID. So I had a bit of a COVID break, but they're the kings and queens giving out, or the queen giving out silver coins to the poor. So so again, this concept that actually, perhaps the leaders are there to serve people rather than to, which was really contrary to a lot of the view at the time, which actually leadership was almost, divine. There's a divinity to it, or you're divinely just bestowed on people. And the word leader, I think, which is quite interesting, from AD 800, was the Anglo-Saxon word for travel. So it was actually a guide taking people where they hadn't been before, which is quite an interesting sort of concept, isn't it? And in fact, the Māori word for leadership is very similar. So rangatira, which is chiefly, ranga actually means to weave together, and tera is a group of travellers. So actually, again, it was this concept of a guide, actually weaving people together, taking them to a place that they haven't been before. which is quite a cool little concept. So the last 100 years really was, the great man, again, sick, around grand man, but again, some people seem to be able to lead in a particular situation, like Winston Churchill being a classic example, a very strong leader during World War II, but before and after wasn't good. So actually there seemed to be a situational element to that. And then we had tray theory, which is very, a time when Darwinism was very strong. Actually, what are the trays that underpin leaders? Are there particular things that people have that enable them to be leaders? And all the research over the last 60 or 70 years shows, there's a small positive correlation between trays and leadership, but it's actually not significant enough to actually say that this is a determining factor. And I think for me, it's really saying that some of these trays will lead people to do the right things, but actually you can do those right things in other ways. You can have other trays or willingness to do the right things that are not because of a disposition to do those things. And then we had sort of situational leadership, which was really saying actually different situations may require you to do different things. And the research around that really shows, well, actually most people can't do more than one leadership style. I think 55% can only do one style, another 20% can only do two, but very few can do all four. So actually that isn't particularly useful.
Means the situation is like your example. Individuals have a style of leadership that is going to be successful in some situations and not others, as opposed to a good leader being able to change their style to suit the situation.
So this was more around Hershey and Blanchard, sort of actually, when a person's first in, are you being directive? When
that implied that a leader could be a leader, and good leaders knew enough to lead for the circumstance. But the other view of that is you've only got one style, so you're going to be able to lead in this case, but not in that case.
I guess the thought piece around the situation you're talking about is actually, so some of the people say, actually, is there a real thing as leadership, or is it actually followership? In some situations we want to follow somebody, and I guess COVID, you could say, is a little bit like that, isn't it? April 2020, things were going to custard worldwide. There's a lot of information about things going to custard. We had somebody who was empathetic and supportive. Actually, do we want to follow somebody at that point? So I guess this is part of the concept. Is it leadership or is it followership? Do we, and World War II, Winston Churchill, somebody there who wasn't a good leader at other times, but actually at a time when we wanted to follow somebody.
Pretty consistent message. It's just that it wasn't very popular.
Indeed. So it's this concept, isn't it? That is it? Do we need to do different things as a leader, or do our people require different things of us, or in fact, is it sort of followership? And then we had sort of managerial grid, which is actually, so it's not when we do things or who we do different things with. Actually, we need to do a bunch of stuff. And of course, the two dimensions were, do we focus on outcomes or do we focus on process? And of course, the answer was the most effective leadership focus on both. So yes, we need to focus on outcomes. That's important. But actually, we're not going to change the outcomes without focusing on people, are we? So the process of how things are done. Then we come to implicit leadership theory, which is actually people have expectations. We have stereotypes of what a good leader is. And certainly I've had a variety of, it's funny on leadership courses, quite often people say, oh, I'm good at all the stuff you're talking about, I just didn't think it applied. And I've taken my human brain out when I've come to work, and I put my manager's brain in, and I've done the reverse on the way out. So they've had this very clear idea about what leadership is. And quite often based on this charismatic sort of stereotype, 1980s sort of, gold medallion sort of theory chess sort of style of leadership. Yeah, and then we had theory X and Y, which is, some people may be motivated by different things. We may actually find it easier to relate to some people than others. And then distributed and collective leadership. It's not just about the CEO. In fact, the hard yards of leadership is often done at the front line rather than at the CEO level. So, when you're trying to motivate low-paid minimum wage workers, that's a lot more challenging than motivating a team of executives. So yeah, where is the hard yards of leadership actually done? And we need everybody to be pulling together. So all those models really were, I guess, descriptive, I suppose. People were actually seeing what happened, describing it, and then psychologists come along and say, well, does that actually work? And typically the answer was no, it doesn't particularly work. And then there's been a bunch of models come up really which are data driven. So rather than describe what's happening, it's either been based on research and then building a model, or actually looking at what's highly effective and then coming up with a model from that. So the first one I wanted to touch on was sort of positive leadership. So this is Kim Cameron sort of coming up with this. So what Kim Cameron looked at was he looked at a whole range of studies around what created effective leadership, and then pulled together this model with a sort of positive psychology slant on it. So yeah, first was a positive climate. So do we have a psychologically safe environment? This is a whole ratio of 5 to 1, positives to negatives, in a team environment. So we've got this positive environment. People solve problems better, they learn better, they retrieve information better and store it better and all that sort of stuff. So our leader's role is to create this positive climate. The next one was this positive relationships. Again, that the leader was relationship focused. So we're building on this idea of these energy networks. So this is, I guess, where in the positive leadership model, your personal energy, your personal passion sort of comes in, and that infects other people in your network. The whole 2 degrees of separation thing, I think, which Clutterbuck picked up on coaching. Kim Cameron talks about in terms of energy, that you, as a leader's energy will dissipate through the organisation. And there's an idea of positive communication. So again, that our ratio of positives to negatives need to be right in change or in relationships. We get, as a leader, we're getting feedback. We're not just assuming we're in the right space. And that's best possible self-feedback type options, and the leaders who are seeking more feedback are generally doing better. I think the stat is, if the top 10% of leaders who ask for feedback are in the top 14% of overall performance. The bottom 10% of who are asking for feedback are in the bottom 10%. So so asking for feedback or growing and learning seems to be fundamental to leadership. And the last one was positive meaning, so that actually it's, we're not just doing a job, we actually know why we're doing what we're doing. So and that obviously people's personal values, the community, the giving, that we can actually associate what we do with, I just don't make and sell baguettes, I create healthier people, or I enrich people's lunchtimes, or so actually we're doing something more than just this thing that we're doing. So that's positive leadership. Servant leadership. Again, this sort of goes back to Lao Tao, 5th century. So but this concept that actually again, how do we serve and connect with people? And if we look at this is not, I've included this because basically the data says this is, if you look at the meta-analyses, this is the most effective leadership style. So so serving and enabling seems to be key to increasing people's productivity.
What's the some meta-analysis done? What's the criterion for effective styles that you sort of be able to rank them on?
Typically organisational performance. Yeah. So I had to go back and look at their meta-analysis, but for example, the strengths-based stuff I'm going to talk about in a second, they looked at customer service or customer perceptions of the organisation. They looked at profitability, ability to implement strategy, engagement of staff. Yeah, so there's a whole bunch of criteria they looked at to determine what was effective leadership.
The sort of surrogates for outcomes of it rather than
correct. Correct. Yeah. Correct. Although some of them, authentic and Māori, I look at, it was who do people see as a great leader. So and who do multiple see rather than just one person see. Yeah. So yes, there's other centered approach to leadership. So I can lead people, but actually I'm helping them achieve, and I'm thinking about them when I lead rather than being all about me. And that's about prioritizing your time around. And I just met with a guy before, and he say, "Oh yeah, all this leadership stuff's good, but I've got all these tasks to do. But now you want me to do this other stuff." And that's about it, isn't it? Actually, as a servant leader, how do we help other people achieve and realise that actually through doing that we can achieve more than us sort of focusing on what we want to achieve. And it also so some people think servant leadership's a being a doormat. It's not. Servant leaders have a direction. So they know what they want to achieve, and typically that's for the good of the community or the good of the organisation. So there's a bigger good that they're pointing people towards and assisting people get there. And if you and certainly obviously it's not a concept held by one person, but there's other people write about as well, which is also including sort of authenticity, humility, stewardship, direction, being key elements to that. But overall, the meta-analysis is sort of saying this is the most effective style of leadership. And I think sort of exemplifies, I think one of my favourite quotes is Max Dupree, which is a leader's role is to define reality, at the end to say thank you, and in between the leader is a servant. So yeah, we're telling people where we're heading, what's reality, where are you at, how do we get there? We're there for the recognition at the end, but actually in between, how do we help people along that path? So Māori leadership. So this is work done by Marie Roche from Waikato University and Jared Ha from AUT. And what they did was they looked at they gathered a whole lot of people who would nominate who they thought were highly effective leaders. So this is a self-nomination process or not a self-nomination, other people nomination process rather than a is it? Yeah. They call they linked it to ethical leadership. Yeah. Direct translation. Yeah. So they said it was very similar to ethical leadership. Yeah, correct. Yeah. So 5 key things. Yeah. Number 1, humility. So this is a Māori proverb. Kumaro doesn't say how sweet it is, and this is their concept that to even find the leaders, they didn't ask people to self-nominate. They got other people to say who did they see as highly effective leaders. And I can't remember the number they had, but I think it was like 50 people had to say this person was a leader, rather than it just being a small number of people who nominated them. And there's this concept of altruism, actually, that it wasn't, that there was a wider community good and self-sacrifice in what they did. So it wasn't, again, they weren't there to achieve for themselves. They're there to achieve for some community goal or some greater good. Whanangatangatanga, which is another focused. So again, similar to servant leadership, actually you're focused on people. You're focused on how did you help people in your community, and also the altruism was linked to this other focused. And the altruism and the other focus was long term, so multi-generational focus. So when you speak, I worked with one of the councils and they wanted to consult with the iwi on something. They said, "Oh, we'll only do it if your time frame's 100 years." So they weren't interested in a 3-year strategy. They wanted a 100-year strategy for the district. And lots of Māori leaders will talk about, well, I'll know I've been affected. I'll know I'll be effective if my grandchildren feel the impact of this. So so it's this long-term focus, which again comes out of that humility, doesn't it? It's not about me. It's not about now. In fact, I won't even feel the benefit of this. It'll be my grandchildren that feel the benefit of this. And there's this tikanga Māori with it as well. So there's a cultural authenticity. So which gets back to this credibility, doesn't it? If I'm leading in a Māori way, I need to know Māori customs and protocols and potentially speak te reo. And
I also think it's part of that about knowing who you are.
Right. Yes. Yep. Yes. Correct. Yep. Yeah. Which ties in very nicely to authentic leadership, because it's really interesting working on the working with various kaumatua in the Psych Society. Cultural competence was a big focus, but actually, the Māori and these cultural competence, because all the Europeans as Pākehā would sign up for these workshops. They go, well, it's not about being Māori. It's about you knowing who you are. Who are you as a person, and what do you bring? You can't interact with us until you know who you are. So, which is part of this authenticity, isn't it? That actually we need to know our background, we need to know our values and how do they impact us before we try and appreciate another culture.
And I guess you got the kind of a whakapapa is so much more important to be able to easier to understand the journey of doing things for future generations if you know where past comes from.
Correct.
And it's just the collectivist culture sort of affect that in terms of being able to make it easier to sort of have that kind of humility and you're doing it for a more altruistic purpose when it is the collective as opposed to individualistic approach and to get into organisations.
Well, but servant leadership has the same focus, isn't it? Servant leadership, or multicultural, isn't it? In terms of originally Chinese, Lao Tao, Christian, and Middle Eastern.
But that's all collectivist cultures as well.
Yeah, true. Yeah, true. Yep.
It's not the sort of Protestant work ethic.
Yeah.
Industrial model.
Yeah, but again, the meta-analysis is saying this is the most effective.
Even
now.
So
Overall, yeah. So authentic leadership again was nomination. So who are the people that everybody saw as highly effective leaders? So it was a perceptual model. And the key elements of this is my sort of summary, but purpose is a key element of that. So people know their purpose, they understand why that's their purpose, and they're prepared to talk about that. So this is emotional component to leadership. It's not just a logical thing. It's actually where are we heading and why are we going there. So there's a deeper connection. And I'm teasing you about it, I guess, but it's that principle, isn't it? One of my clients is Alpine Energy, and they sell spas, but actually their purpose is to save marriages and create better families. So how do we think about what are the outcomes or the deeper purpose in what we do? Yes, self-perception. Yeah, so they know who they are. So they know they're prepared to talk about where they come from, and because they know it and are confident in it, they're prepared to be vulnerable about what they're not. So, you know, I think this is. We'll talk about the strengths in a second, but I think this is one of the key benefits. If you look at the research on strengths, if we work on 4 or 5 strengths, we become much more confident about who we are, but also that enables us to be vulnerable about who we're not. You know, what are we not good at? And then how do we use the people around us to be that? And how do we be open to that?
How's that different with self-awareness?
Oh, same thing, yeah. I like alliteration, so I was trying to go for 5 Ps. Otherwise, I would have gone for awareness. You're quite right. Yeah. Fair enough. Yeah. And authentic leadership, they talk about actually going back to where you were born every year. You know, some of these CEOs, who are from, very deprived backgrounds, actually going to a project in the Bronx, to actually revisit where they came from and stay connected to that. And I think this. I'm not sure you're familiar with the research around empathy, but empathy drops off as you get up the organisation. The more power you get, the less empathy you seem to have. The less accurate you are. On 19 out of 20 competencies, you overrate your competency on those the further up you get. So it seems to be, if we're not getting negative feedback, if we're not getting other perspectives, empathy seems to decline. And our perceptions of our strengths seem to decline. So this touching base with where you came from seems to be a key to how do we maintain that.
Has that been assessed
empathy
on the individuals and seen that on a longitudinal study those
yes.
decline as they rise? Or
Yes.
is it that the people with the least of those are more likely to get promoted?
No, they decline. Yeah. At a biological level, some of the studies showing your mirroring neurons actually degrade as you go up the organisation. So, we're normally, if Susan's folding her arms, then other of us will mirror. But actually, as you get up the organisation, those mirroring neurons seem to degrade. So So it seems to be at a biological level that the empathy drops off. And then there's this passion concept that actually that they're passionate and energized and enthusiastic about what they're doing. But it's not about for themselves, it is about for the organisation. So it's how do we achieve for the organisation, which again is similar to the servant and Māori leadership, isn't it? It's not about me, it's how do we progress the cause or the purpose of what you're doing. Yeah, people are the focus, and George talks about sort of building these enduring relationships with people. And lastly, it's us practicing the strengths or values even under pressure. So so they're continually learning and growing in line with these strengths or values. So the next one is sort of the strengths-based leadership. And this was Zinger and Faulkner. So their initial study, I think they had a database of 20,000 leaders, and they were, I can't remember which one, Zinger or Faulkner's the data guy. So one of them said to the other guy, let's find which competencies are most important for highly effective leaders. And this was data-driven. So they had data on profitability, customers, satisfaction, a whole range of parameters. So they did 2 studies. The first study with 20,000 leaders, there they found if you were average at everything, effectively you were at the 30th percentile overall. So the second study they did was replication of it with 150,000 managers, showed you're at 34th percentile, so not a lot of change. But if you've got one strength at the 90th percentile, so one thing was really good, all of a sudden you went from the 30th or 34th to the 64th percentile, 3 to the 80th, and then 5 to the 91st percentile or 90th percentile. It had 16 that were at the 5th percentile, which I don't know if anybody did. You were still at the 91st percentile. You didn't get any better.
I did the leadership service based.
Right, yeah. And effectively, performance was almost double on just about every criteria if you looked at those who are below average to those who had 5 strengths in the top 10%. In my personal, well, and again, this is, we think this is all new, but the Romans actually believed that actually we all had one thing we're really good at. In fact, they never asked the question, how intelligent were you? They said, what are you intelligent in? So there's an assumption that we're all deeply good at something. Which I think this is this really interesting concept. And if you look at Birmingham and a whole range of people, their proposition is that we follow spikiness. That actually, we follow people who are exceptional at some stuff. Steve Jobs was exceptional at some stuff. He was pretty nasty in some other areas, but actually, if we find some people who are exceptional, we want to follow those people because of their strengths. And my personal theory here is, if we look at the research on interviewing, we can't interview on more than 4 to 5 competencies. If you do, you get halo or horns error. If you factor analyze or look at factor analysis results or 360 results, typically people are rating people on 4 or 5 dimensions, even if you've got 16 or 34 competencies. So it seems to me that actually our brains can probably process about 4 or 5 dimensions of human performance. So if you're good at 4 or 5 things, actually that's my capacity for analysing you. You may be bad at some stuff, but actually that doesn't even enter in my analysis, unless you're really bad at it. The career derailleur, fatal flaw sort of stuff. But if you're average at a whole bunch of stuff and really good at 5 things, I probably think you're exceptional. Yep.
Hang on, I think
Yeah.
Yep. My clients was also the reverse.
The horns. Yeah.
Hey, John, I was going to make a comment that Jim Collins in the book, Good to Great, was all about focusing on strengths rather than weaknesses, and that's how the organisations actually improved performance.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. And this is the leadership tent by Zinger and Falkman. But again, they didn't really say that this actually added anything to the equation. They sort of said, I think Michelle Shields was talking to us last month, and she was saying, if you want to really improve, actually doing something in the focus on results area and something in interpersonal areas where you get you the biggest bang for your buck. So rather than just doing more in the focus results area, but didn't seem to add overall to the overall impact.
Wasn't the theory that the characters that's the one that
Yeah. And the last one, Michael stole my thunder there, is level 5. And this is a bit of a flawed study in that they only looked at I think 1,500 companies that had been in existence for 30 years, and they looked at companies who had done average for 15 years and then did exceptionally well for 15 years. So what they were looking for out of a whole bunch of companies were those who actually followed this trajectory. And by exceptionally well was they had to have 15 years where they performed 3 times above the market and whatever their market was. So, so if you're in healthcare or insurance, there might be different markets, but you performed 3 times better than your comparators. So they got down to 11 firms who met this criteria. And then they did a whole good to great stuff. They did a whole lot of stuff around what actually created that high level of performance. And that's where they come up with this level 5. Leadership, they found, was the one thing. So they looked at strategy, products, a whole range of stuff, marketing, and found none of those differentiated. What did differentiate was leadership. And then when they dug down into it, they called what they called level 5 leadership, which was this, personal humility. So again, we've got humility on the table. People were modest. In fact, I think 10 of the 11 actually didn't even apply for the job. They were shoulder tapped for the CEO role. I think, again, 11 of the 11 were actually internal appointments.
Yeah, that was the thing, that these
Yeah.
so-called, these great CEO
Yeah.
fixers who came around organisations, generally the organisations fell off
Correct.
very quickly after they left.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep. Yes. So they were the level 4 leaders, is what Jim Collins called them. So they created the short-term impact, but actually the organisation was worse off. And fundamentally, level 5 leaders, he said, attributed successes to their team and failures to themselves. So because they attributed successes to their team, they built the teams, they had failures to themselves, so they continually learned. The level 4 leaders attributed successes to themselves and failures to the team. So they would burn off. The other major factor is this, and this is a general research on charismatic leadership, is that the excessive focus on outcomes is pretty hard to sustain. You know, we can actually raise people to a new level of performance through charismatic leadership in the short term, but actually that's not long-term viable. To build long-term, we need that managerial grid. We need to build capability. We need to build capacity, and that's where the level 5 leaders, did much better. So they are the sort of models that I've sort of pulled in really, and then I said, well, okay, how does that sort of look together? So my core of my model is actually this. Actually, that exceptional leaders seem to focus on 4 or 5 things. And I've chosen 4 or 5 because it gets you to the 81st percentile or no, I think it's even better than that. I think it's the 88th or something, isn't it? 5's 91st, but 4 is I think 88th. But not only that, Martin Seligman's research shows that actually we need to focus on 4 or 5 things to actually build our resilience and our happiness. If you focus on only 3, actually you don't seem to get the same impact. So yeah, so the magic number seems to be sort of 4 or 5 strengths. So if we look at the research around this, the traits, ability seems to come in here. The strengths, 3 to 5 strengths leadership, 3 to 5 strengths. But they also talk about actually you need some self-development, you need some capability in there as well. Seligman talked about developing 4 or 5 strengths. Positive leadership talks about developing yourself. Authentic leadership talks about practicing your strengths. I haven't got level 5 in there, but I should have that, shouldn't I? Yeah, the tikanga Māori is the tikanga. That's one of their capability strengths. And the Birmingham talked about the spikiness, that actually the socialised power, that actually people want to follow you because of the spikiness rather than because you have institutional sort of authority. So the next one is this is a positive. And in here we've got trait-based. I mean, on the Swedish twin studies where they looked at leadership, and they came out with energy or positivity as one of the key, what they thought was a genetic component of leadership. Positive leadership obviously has energy as a key part of that. Authentic leadership talks about passion. Level 5 talks about this fierce determination for a long-term success. And strengths-based leadership talks about initiative. And we've got people. So obviously you can't be a leader without people. So it's a bit of a no-brainer, this one. But certainly servant and Māori leadership was this other focus. Actually, we're building relationships with people. Level 5, we built the teams because we attributed success to them and failures to ourselves. The positive leadership, sort of the positive comms, positive relationships. The strengths-based, there's an interpersonal, was one of the 10 poles they had there. And the authentic leadership is this, enduring relationships. And managerial grit, again, was, yes, we need to focus on outcomes, but we're not going to change it without focusing on people in the process. The next one is sort of purpose. And then we've got this, so this Māori leadership, it's this altruism, but with this multi-generational focus, so long-term focus. The ethical leadership, we've got the noble purpose in there. Level 5, we've got the fierce determination, but also this the hedgehog principle that we need to take the complexity of the world and boil it down to a purpose we can communicate to our people. Positive leadership talks about meaning. Strengths-based leadership talks about focusing on results, and the servant leadership talks about this bigger focus. How do we focus on communities or the organisational outcome? So it's something bigger than ourselves. And the last one is this, perspective. Basically, humility seems to be a key part of all these theories. So Māori, servant, level 5, and authentic all talk about humility and awareness of our own weaknesses and strengths and willingness because of that humility to build and develop the people around us. So that's what I've got to so far, really, in terms of my fourth round of integration model. The thing which I'm not sure where it fits is the central pole, the character and integrity. So so it doesn't fit neatly in my model at the moment. But I wonder if it's actually a combination of those things. If I know what David's really good at, I know what I'm going to get when I go and see him. I know what he's going to do because he's got 4 or 5 things in there. So I have a very strong mental model of who he is. I know he's humble, and I know he has a sense of purpose and communicates a sense of purpose. Does that then make me think he has character and integrity? So I'm not sure whether character and integrity are a part of this, a separate part, or whether it's actually a result of doing some of these things. So that's my thought